Okay, thank you for viewing this presentation on the pedestrian behavior and modeling for commuter airport terminals. I'm John Gales, an associate professor at York University in Canada. The work that is going to be presented is primarily prepared by two exceptional graduate students, Seth Gayton and Timothy Young, and also co-supervised by a faculty member at Carleton University, also in Canada. The work that I'm going to show today has really been a long time in the making, principally because it was significantly delayed post-COVID, but I'll explain a little bit about that as we go forward with the presentation in general. There are about 5 themes that I'll be discussing today. I just want to stress that the research is still fairly in a preliminary stage. There's a number of avenues that we still want to go into to investigate some of the observations that we've seen. So I'll first start by describing the research program that we have about airports at York University, a little bit about the capabilities of our group and lab in relation to these types of projects involving human behavior, a number of the limitations that were brought on by the ethics and also agreements with the facilities in question, our approach to data analysis, and again, some of our preliminary observations that we'll go through. So, as briefly mentioned, this is actually part of a larger research program that we're undertaking about airports in general. And what I'm showing today is really only one subcomponent, which involves the human behavior element to the project, explicitly the pedestrian movement aspect. Our overarching study is looking at the airport as a whole, which, as you can understand, is a very large undertaking. Hence, this project has been in development for quite some time, and this is the first time that we're sharing at least part of what we've been up to the last 3 or 4 years. The human behavior component is complementary to a recent SFPE project that we had funded through the anthropometric data and movement speeds project. In terms of the focus of what we're showing today is really about movement speeds, but putting it into the context of a particular environment. Airports have a lot of very interesting data that can be presented with them. Specifically, we're focusing in on luggage users and the effect of luggage on the users within the
Hello.
airport, or at least what we can observe within this particular one. One of the key things that I do need to stress, and what many studies have shown, is the environment does have significant influence on movement behaviors, and this can be culture, facility type, and even the time of the day. As I'll discuss briefly, you have off-peak or on-peak influences, and airports are very subjected to culture specifically. So one thing to really highlight is the results that we're talking about today are for a North American commuter airport. You would need extensive further study of different airports to look whether the results can be generally applied to a different environment. So the analysis and data collection, we were very fortunate in this case that the data was principally applied to us or given to us in the sense of the video footage. So we
Okay,
didn't
sounds good.
actually have to collect video footage, though we are looking in the future work with our collaborators as into looking at specific angles which may require specific types of video technologies. And we are developing some of these right now. They're still very much in a conception phase. But one of the things to be really careful about when we're considering the data collection is it's going to be very project specific and influenced by ethical limitations. For example, in many cases that you may encounter is that even though they may have CCTV footage, it may not be at a resolution that's significant enough to be able to get good quality analysis from that video footage. In anticipation of this, and we do a lot of data collection studies, we tend to do more in the field rather than in a lab setting. So we've invested significantly in a number of different camera systems, including LiDAR technologies, to be looking at data collection. In this particular case, we didn't have to use the technologies that we had available to us because the airport CCTV footage was of significant high resolution that could be provided to us. However, based on our previous studies, we've been working with methods to extract data from particular video footage to be able to create trajectories. And that has been a good advantage for us, specifically also if the camera footage may have some distortions that are given to us. We've been coming up with some corrective measures. In this case, we didn't need to use any of those. So the first thing that had to be done when it came down to this study was an ethics consideration. We followed our thesis dissertation protocol approval, and it also incorporated an institutional disclosure restriction from the airport itself, which unfortunately means I can't directly show videos of the data collection at this time. There's still levels of clearances that have to be performed. As I mentioned, this is still fairly preliminary as it goes, and we can't disclose the location of the airport either, other than that it's in North America with it. Beyond this, we had quite a bit of autonomy to investigate what we wanted to in the study. And as I mentioned, roller luggage or luggage in general was a specific area that we had an interest in looking into about how people were using or how this may be affecting their speeds. So the data collection process, footage was provided to us over 3 days on the land side of the terminal. That's before security. The videos that were provided to us, again, it's part of a larger research program. It includes within the airport and exterior to the airport. And in this case, we're only talking about a specific corridor that is in relation to this airport today. The event is just a natural event that we're recording. I say natural in the sense that it's not emergency. There's no alarm going on. There's no influences that we're doing other than provide regular day-to-day footage of people using a specific corridor within this airport. When we looked at generating speeds, we were looking at speeds of individuals moving on particular walkways and also on people movers. And effectively, we were monitoring them over a specific length, which was a very linear length. So we had very good reliability as to what distances and speeds and times that people would be moving over these spaces. So, and you can get a viewpoint of what the corridor kind of looks like below, and there's 3 specific cameras that we're looking at. In terms of the analysis, we use a form of semi-automatic tracking. We did not use manual tracking, more or less because we had a very linear path to measure spot speeds, and we weren't really concerned about high levels of grouping or densities in this case, as the video footage was not showing those influences. So it was mainly spot speeds. The data wasn't available to generate densities. There wasn't significant volume going through to be able to have that as a concern. So many of the automated scripts that we had used in our previous research that involved a museum and a railway station that had a certain amount of verification already done using this semi-automatic technique, which relies on the Canova software. We got some pretty, or we were able to derive some pretty specific values. We couldn't really use manual tracking, even if we wanted to, because we would need a number of student researchers to clear the disclosure agreements, and only 2 specific students would have the right to view the footage. So I kind of described a little bit about this technique. The full paper gives a little bit more information about the process, about how spot analysis was done. It's a much more simple case in this particular environment because it's fairly straightforward. We did perform some modeling, and I'll basically say that it really didn't matter which model that we were looking at specifically in this case. Really, we just wanted to see where could we get something very similar using the new movement speed profiles to what would happen in reality, because we had the fixed endpoints of the corridor, so we could time an individual from one end to the other and get an average speed of about how people are moving through that particular space. The challenge is the corridor is very large, or at least large in a sense that there is going to be some level of fatigue and group behavior that may influence that comparison. And that's why we're pretty much at a preliminary stage, as we still have to do a little bit more analysis of that data to really look at that aspect. And nevertheless, it gives a nice viewpoint as to whether we're starting to represent reality, but it still needs a little bit more work. We relied on mass motion in the case of this project, mostly because where our school or university is, it is a typical software that is used a lot within civil engineering firms. So the students that run through our program, pun intended there, would have a very beneficial aspect to understanding how the software works for their careers. We looked at three scenarios, principally 2 and 3 are the more interesting ones, whether you're looking at how people with roller luggage go through a space or without any luggage go through the space and what the impact is. And what we did find is that the data analysis was showing anyway that we didn't really have much of a difference between people using roller luggage or no luggage in general. And you can see that within the table. These speeds are inclusive of the thread speed at 0.7. There was a bit of a difference off peak hours, but not a specific large difference in that sense. We did manage to see some very interesting specific behaviors as well, whether people would not use the moving walkway, how people passed on the moving walkways, and also a little bit of gender analysis, but nothing too specific there. And in comparison to what the actual average travel times through the corridors, we were close, but it wasn't exact, and we're principally believing that this may have to do with some aspects of fatigue and maybe some group aspects or some travel events that maybe weren't caught on camera. So there's some additional analysis that needs to follow when it comes to interpreting the modeling results in relation to the actual data collection that we've done. But it's fairly exciting what's coming out. We still need to do a little bit more looking into it, but there isn't much difference between it within this case. And that's why I have to stress at the beginning is this is one airport, one environment that's studied to really say that the results are going to be generally applicable, that there is no difference, which we've seen other studies where there is very specific differences, particularly with large groups. It is going to require a little bit more repetition of other studies. However, studying airports in general is very difficult, and getting access to them is also very difficult. So it's a really good first step, but there still needs to be a lot more consideration into the work. If you do have further questions that I haven't been able to cover during this presentation, you're always welcome to reach out to myself at our York Fire research group, which is based in Toronto. We had a number of collaborators with this project. We've received funding and collaborative support from ARUP and NSERC Canada for this study, and of course some of the preliminary work through SFPE, and some of the supervisory support through Carleton University through their transportation group. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully this gives you a little bit of a taste as to what we've been up to and not talking about for the last 4 years at York University. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll get switched over for questions here. We'll keep an eye on that. I see some coming in. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. I'll do this. Hello, John.
Hi, Brian. You can hear me okay?
Almost. I hear you just fine. Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I see we have one question so far. And I saw just a note about it in the slide, but did you look into if grouping of people influenced average speed? So I know you mentioned something about grouping effects. And were there any other interesting observations outside of just the roller versus non-roller differentiation there?
Yeah, I think I'll kind of start with grouping is that we do think that along the corridor, there's an escalator near the end, and we do think that there was a bit of grouping to get onto that escalator, which was contributing to reality being slower than what our models or profiles were saying. So it still needs a little bit more analysis into the video to see specifically about whether there was what these sizes of groups were and if they were actually influencing the data. But our focus was mostly just on the movement. And the second question, Brian, was?
The second had to do with any other interesting observations outside of just the roller versus non-roller bag or luggage.
Yeah, I think passing was something that we thought was pretty interesting that was occurring. So we focused a bit on that, about how people were trying to overtake one another when they were going through the corridor and how they would overtake one another. That was a fairly interesting result. One thing that the paper and the presentation doesn't really go into is that when what we're talking about in the paper is heavy luggage, so like rollers, people can still have light luggage like laptops, and it is a commuter airport, so most people will have some kind of possession with them. So that's something else that in the space of a conference paper, you don't really have time to go into those effects. But as we flesh out the study, we'll be talking more about the different types of luggage and their effects.
Yeah, okay, because I was wondering about sort of the two-wheel drag behind at an angle versus the upright four-wheel pushers, and if it's in front of somebody or behind somebody, like if there's any impact to how people push.
Yeah, and that requires a deeper delve in that, for that. I like to look at the conference papers as this is just the tip of the iceberg. Specifically this project, there's so much that you can spend looking into these videos, and if you try to do everything, you're not going to get anywhere, and this took us 3 years anyway to get to this point.
Right. And in terms of that and data analysis and recording, is this open data anywhere available online, or is there going to be some way to access it for other validation or verification studies?
Yeah, we're hoping the talks with the airport go well that allow us to release more of this information. But right now, there's a lot of sensitivity associated to this type of footage. So it still has a bit more discussion to go, but we're hopeful that, it's not really showing anything sensitive. It's just a corridor and movement through the corridor. So that would be ideal if we can get to that stage. But right now, it's fairly tightened with it. But
yeah, and maybe in the future, some like anonymized trajectory data or something that's just generalized and not even the video specific, but some abstraction from that.
And that's sort of where we're going with our research now, is we're developing LiDAR technologies where we can take the space and put it in a way that it isn't identifiable, but you still have the data points that you need with it. So, but I think, going back to that question about the availability of these videos, I think it's really important that we move towards having that type of database. When it comes to some of my frustrations when we're looking at more legacy data and we're like, okay, well, you set a profile, you set a speed, but I kind of like to watch that video just to see if, how that actually is. And a lot of these videos are thrown away and you never get to see them again, especially the older stuff.
I think that's a
Not
universal,
digitized either. Or,
yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a universal need in science and data in general, is this sort of the whole life cycle from cradle to archival of scientific data collection and where it goes. And it's always a problem. Yeah.
Sadly, a lot of, once the journal's done, the zip folder is stored in a hard drive, and then the hard drive no longer plugs into your your recent computer.
It's on a shelf in a box somewhere, hopefully, but that doesn't help much. We had another question here about the 0.7 meters per second with the use of the rolling walkways or the use of their own feet. So was that being moved at that speed, or is that a walking?
No, that's the thread speed of the people mover itself.
Okay.
And then the profiles include the 0.7 meters per second. So if you want to get the actual speed of the individual, subtract 0.7 from the data sets we've given.
Okay, great. And then did you also measure anything in open space and not in just the corridor settings?
Yeah, we have the whole land side of the airport actually recorded. So, but the paper only says the corridor. So like this study is part of a transportation study where we're looking at even passenger drop-off, passenger pickups, and things like that. So we have the whole journey right up until security.
Wow,
and
nice.
Then after security, it's that's not available.
Okay. Yeah, so then in light of that, Wojciech's comment to stop being so secret about your great work, John. So thanks for that.
Well, the thing with all of these studies is that data analysis with human behavior stuff, and then the ethics that come with it, it takes a long time to put these studies together. So this particular study was pre-pandemic data collected 2019. And then to do it properly, it takes time to put these together.
Yeah.
So
I'd
love to tell you what else we're doing.
Yeah, we'll wait patiently. Yeah, well, and I hope with the general data availability, and we'll continue to watch your work, and hopefully someone might pick up that data set and include it in some other modeling software that I won't mention today, but we'll see what we can add to validation data sets or verification data sets from all of that. It sounds like really great data. We've really enjoyed the format and the availability of like the ULIC data sets that have been on there with trajectory data and good documentation of the experiment or whatever. So that model is so nice to use in general for any kind of model developer. So we hope something like that becomes available from this someday. So, but thank you very much. Any questions in the audience? Yes, we have.
Check.
And let me know if you can hear this or not, John. If not, I'll repeat. So.
No, I can't hear it.
Hi, John. Does that work?
Can you hear?
No.
Okay, go ahead and ask, and I'll repeat.
Oh, okay. So.
Or if you can put it in the Q&A, that would help too. But go ahead.
Okay, so I will just answer here, and maybe you can repeat that for me. Thank you.
Sure.
So I'm just wondering that when you talk about the airport, it's an interesting scenario, and with the airport, it is being more complex, and we have the stores or floors above the ground and underground. So I'm thinking, will it affect the people's behavior or the pedestrians' movement when they walk through the corridors to the airport?
So if they're on an upper level or a lower level?
Yeah, upper level and the level underground. So when you walk through the corridors, does it matter whether he walked to the upper ground or the underground?
Oh, I see. So if there's any impact for movement, depending on if they're like underground or on a ground level or above, if you've looked at any kind of impact of elevation, or if it's all just sort of the same depending on level. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'm more curious about if the people walking underground, will the psychology or their emotion will affect their movement.
Oh, okay. So yeah, if there's any sensitivity to being underground and in the psychology or the movement for people who are not at ground level, they sort of have some subterranean level that they're navigating through.
Yeah, I think the answer to that would take us probably 30 minutes to go through the psychology that's involved there.
Your
But
next paper.
yeah, well, a whole other study, I think.
Yeah.
There's definitely going to be effects to people's behavior based on the environment and what is around them, particularly what sensory aspects are around them. I think for our study, the interesting aspect is that we have a very linear path, in my view, that allows us to look at that, traverse through that section where we don't have too much stimuli around us. So we're getting basically a raw speed. And then if you wanted to throw in more of these things, when you go outside of the corridor, you're going to get, I don't want to use distractions, but you're going to get other stimuli that will begin to affect that journey. So I think what the students did, which was pretty fun with the modeling, is they started to do dynamic assignments to speeds, to flip between one or two different speeds in the model for the individuals. So I love the question, and I'd love to spend more time looking into it. But certainly, a short answer is yes, there's going to be effects, but it really depends on what the stimuli that the individuals encountering in that journey.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's fine. Okay, yeah. So there are a couple more questions in the Q&A, John. If you can see that in the event, you might be able to reply there or in chat. Having to do with average speed tabulated, it seems fast for walking, and what does that refer to? And then, do the rollers affect pedestrian movement, speed, and behavior? For example, carrying luggage is thought to affect walking direction and behavior. And I know that you had mentioned some additional research in the effect of the luggage and rollers. And you said there's not enough range of data available for speed density analysis, but what differences in interperson distances were quantified because of the roller luggage and just that additional spacing and distance? So I'll leave that. That was a few there. If you want to answer in chat, or you can send that to us.
I'll try to find where the chat is.
Yeah, it should be another tab in the event there. If you click on event.
Oh, I
see.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it now.
Okay,
perfect.
Great. So thank you very much, John, and thank you everybody
Thanks.
for that. Great questions.